Please be seated. So I have a confession to make. And it's good that it's just among friends and not like recorded for anyone outside of here to hear. So my confession is that I recently called Lillian Adams Satan. What? For anybody who knows Lillian Adams, she's not high on anybody's list to be called Satan. She's like one of the sweetest souls God ever created. So here's what happened. We were on the bus coming back from San Francisco from Reverend Joe's wife memorial service. And the whole busload of us stopped at McDonald's for a bathroom break and a snack break. And Lillian, who was sitting in the aisle across from me, got French fries. And I mean, she got French fries. She got a lot of French fries to share. And she, in her sweet way, offered me French fries, and I, in my sweet way, declined. And she, in her sweet way, offered me French fries, and I, in my sweet way, declined. And so after like 4 or 5 rounds of this, I finally yelled, "Get behind me, Satan!" And that was the end of the French fry experience. But that kind of playful experience with Lillian was rattling around in my mind the last few weeks as I meditated on this gospel. And it really impacted the way that I heard this gospel lesson, because my affection for Lillian is certainly no greater than Jesus's affection for us. And so as he rebuked Peter, I knew that he was also just holding this enormous love in his mind and his heart for Peter. So Peter, last week, Simon got a new name, right? He was named Peter, rock, to indicate that he's a foundational part of the Jesus movement. He was praised for recognizing the long-awaited Messiah, praised for recognizing Christ. And then this week, he's given yet another name, Satan. Jesus, of course, was not really identifying Peter as Satan incarnate any more than I was identifying Lillian as Satan incarnate. I'm sure Jesus recognized that Peter was speaking and acting out of his love for Jesus and out of his deep desire to remain with Jesus. From Peter's perspective, Jesus didn't have to die. There were all kinds of other ways this could go down. There was definitely some other way for this to happen. I think one of the most confusing things about following Jesus is how often our good intentions can get in the way of the best intentions. How often our good intentions can get in the way of an even greater good. And I don't think it was Peter by himself that wanted to find some other way. You can bet that Jesus wanted to find another way too. He was going into his death with a sense of dread. He sweat blood. Jesus wanted there to be another way too, and he must have felt the pull of that temptation. He must have felt the pull of that temptation down to his very bones to join Peter in finding some other way. I think the sharpness of Jesus' rebuke of Peter probably reflects the strength of that temptation to find some other way. I find myself really tempted, too, to find some way around the cross. The world, I guess, has always been really complicated and contradictory, but it just feels intensely that way right now. My mind swirls and my heart just aches with all that's going on in our world. Sometimes I find myself wanting to speak and act in ways that I know Jesus would rebuke. I'm probably not the only person in the room who's sometimes tempted to be less than Christ. Probably not, just guessing. For me, this most often comes out in relatively small ways, like I find myself wanting to join in conversations or join in Facebook posts that tear somebody else down, somebody that I think is wrong or ignorant. But sometimes the impulses are a lot bigger than that. like, I don't even know if I should share this with you, but like the impulse to just take all the haters that we can find and put them in the path of the next North Korean missile launch. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's good that I don't have the means to implement the impulses that I have. I do really, truly, increasingly feel an intensity of impulse to act out, to respond to hate with hate. And it would be really easy to do that. It would be really easy to act from my sense of indignation, from what feels to me like righteous anger, to act from my fear, from my discomfort with how vulnerable we are. It would be easy to act out of my longing for more control, from my attachment to the things being the way I want them to be, things being the way that I think is the best way. When I act from those lesser impulses, though, I cause harm. It's destructive. Small ways, big ways. And it's presumptuous of me. It's as if I'm saying to Jesus, step aside, Jesus. I've got a better plan. I know how this needs to go down. I have a really small human mind, and I have really limited human vision. And it's hard for me to see God's plan for new life and resurrection out of all the change and loss and death that's swirling around us. Staying with Jesus on the path to the cross and bearing some of the weight of the cross ourselves takes intentional choice and profound trust that God can bring resurrection out of every kind of death. Every day I have to reset my intention to choose compassion over indignation, to choose to see the face of a wounded and lost person rather than my enemy, to choose justice rather than vengeance. Many times each day, we need to reset our intentions to deny our lesser selves, our lesser impulses, and follow the way of Christ, which is the way to the cross. This is a huge challenge at those times in our lives when things feel really chaotic and complicated and contradictory. I took my car to the shop for some work on Thursday. I was told that the computer software in my car needed updating, which I find really weird, right? My car needs software updating, but that's kind of another topic. So the shop was just a block away from where a deputy sheriff was killed on Wednesday. And this was the day after that had happened. And employee after employee told me how traumatic that experience had been for them. They had been on lockdown for most of the day. There were helicopters swirling overhead. There were sirens blaring. There were police officers with weapons drawn crawling all over their property. The people felt really scared, and everyone said they just wanted to be home with their loved ones and safe. And then at some point, a phone call came through. And Deputy Bob French, he was the father of one of the employees there. And that employee got the call that he had died. Yeah. And so all of their fear turned to grief and anger. One young woman said, "Sometimes I just want to give up on this world. There's just so much pain." And that temptation toward despair, it's such a powerful force. It's a force we all have to wrestle with. It's tempting to disengage from this world rather than to stand in the suffering and try to still be a light. I sat down in the waiting room waiting for my car, and the news was on TV, and I thought, I just don't know if I can stomach any more news. There were stories about Harvey and all the suffering in the wake of that hurricane. But there were also all these phenomenal stories about rescue. Ordinary people like you and me are taking their boats and their rafts and their pontoons, and they're rescuing people. And ordinary people like you and me are feeding people and sheltering people and extending all kinds of kindness. There was one man, a rescuer, who was interviewed, and he said, "It doesn't matter who we are, what we do, what we believe, where we live. We take care of each other. That's what we do." A crisis like Harvey helps us to get really, really clear about what's important. And so the challenge is, how do we stay that clear when the floodwaters recede? Kathy Hopner is a priest at Trinity Cathedral in Sacramento, and she wrote an article in their e-newsletter about the tragedy and the beauty that's just all mixed together and how clear things get in crisis. She said, "I think it is that simple, that we just take care of each other, and I think it's that hard. We listen to each other's stories. We don't judge. We speak in ways that are faithful and courageous to each other and to our communities. We recognize that we depend on each other. We use language that brings us close to the truth. We do what we're called to do. We do justice. We love kindness. We walk humbly with God." Kathy went on to quote a passage from Parker Palmer's book called Healing the Heart of Democracy. He wrote, "We live in pivotal times. What happens next in you and the world around you depends on how your heart breaks. If it breaks apart into 1,000 pieces, the results may be anger, depression, disengagement. But if it breaks open into greater capacity to hold the complexities and contradictions of human experience, the result may be new life. Death and life and tragedy and beauty and evil and goodness are all jumbled together in the world around us and in ourselves. Each of us has to choose what to do with that. We can choose to turn away and try to hide and disengage. We can choose to fight the evil we encounter with evil. Or we can choose to deny our lesser impulses and follow the way of Christ. It's a difficult path, but it's the path that leads to light and to life. As our hearts break open, not apart, let us continue to journey together in compassion and mercy and justice. Amen.